All right, everybody. Welcome to a little impromptu live stream from me, J. Stephen Roberts, Real Crusades History. Okay, I'll jump back over to the chat at the end, guys, and take some questions. So, welcome to Real Crusades History. Today, I want to address the episode of alleged cannibalism that took place during the First Crusade at the Siege of Marah on Numan. Now, this particular episode is undeniably one of the most disturbing and horrifying episodes in medieval history, but it's often brought up by people with a certain axe to grind. They'll usually mention the incident rather vaguely, try to make it sound like just, everybody involved in the First Crusade was some insane cannibal running around, right? But that's not historical. It's important that we look at the specifics of this incident, because the truth is that this was basically a case of a group of men who were isolated in a town after a siege. Famine set in, people were starving, and then out of desperation, some people engaged in cannibalism of already dead bodies. So basically, we can compare this to like a plane crash in some remote mountain region today where people are starving, and so they engage in cannibalism. So it's important to get a balanced perspective on this episode so that we look at the actual history here. So let's jump into this. So here's what actually happened. During the First Crusade, after the conquest of Antioch, one group of Crusaders struck out to take the city of Marah on Numan. So this is one of the dependent cities of Antioch and ended up being a part of the Principality of Antioch later. So after the siege, when Marah had been captured and the main army departed, the Crusaders left behind to garrison the town were struck by a severe famine. So after a long time of starving, some of them broke down and roasted the flesh of Saracens who had already been killed in the previous fighting. In other words, this was a crisis situation. So this incident, of course, horrified those who went through it, because cannibalism was considered an unspeakable evil throughout medieval Europe and Asia at this time, just as it is today in our world. So to get a better perspective, let's take a look at some of our primary sources for the First Crusade. Let's see what some of these sources have to say about this. So first of all, let's turn to Fulcher of Chartres, 1059 to 1127. Those are his dates. And he was a French priest who participated in and documented the First Crusade. So this is Fulcher. Then they, a group of Crusaders, hastened to the other city, Marah on Numan, and besieged it for 20 days. Here our men suffered from excessive hunger. I shudder to say that many of our men, terribly tormented by the madness of starvation, cut pieces of flesh from the buttocks of Saracens lying there dead. These pieces they cooked and ate, savagely devouring the flesh while it was insufficiently roasted. In this way, the besiegers were harmed more than the besieged. So that's Fulcher of Chartres, A History of the Expedition to Jerusalem, and that's on pages 112 through 113. So, what is Fulcher telling us here? Well, he comments on what a nightmare scenario this is, and he expresses his disgust at it. So Fulcher's attitude, basically we're getting a mainstream attitude from this period. This same story is recounted in a letter by Godfrey of Bouillon and Raymond of St. Gilles. So these are two of the main leaders of the First Crusade. So this is from their letter to the Pope. After we had triumphed over the enemy, as our army was wasting away at Antioch from sickness and weariness, and was especially hindered by the dissensions among the leaders, we proceeded into Syria, stormed Bara and Marah, cities of the Saracens, and captured the fortresses in that country. And while we were delaying there, there was so great a famine in the army that the Christian people now ate the putrid bodies of the Saracens. So that's Godfrey of Bouillon and Raymond of St. Gilles to Pope Paschal II, September 1099. Okay. So Godfrey and Raymond are basically describing these events with the same tone, used by full care. And again, here's another example of this story being discussed. This time, this is from the chronicler Robert the Monk. They were so desperate with hunger that they ended up, a horrible thing to have to describe, cutting up the bodies of the Turks, cooking them, and eating them. The Count of St. Gilles was distraught with such difficulties. Okay, so I think this helps us get some perspective on this episode. This was an incident that took place among one group of crusaders involved in the First Crusade, and the very poor at that. And it was isolated, and it happened during a desperate situation because of a famine. So, I mean, clearly, if somebody tries to pass this situation off as if throughout the First Crusade you just had a bunch of cannibals running around, eating people everywhere, I mean, that's not historical. That's crazy. So we have to look at the episode for what it actually is. Now, it's interesting. We have a Muslim chronicler, the great Usama ibn Munkid, whose dates are 1095 to 1188. This is one of my favorite authors from this period, and he describes an episode of cannibalism in Muslim Egypt. So this is a very strange and confusing episode. Again, kind of like the situation at Marah, but if somebody used this episode to try and say that medieval Muslims were a bunch of cannibals, I mean, that would be absurd too. This is a bizarre and distinctive episode and doesn't reflect mainstream attitudes in the medieval world, Christendom, Islam, whatever. But let's take a look at this account given here by Usama. A young man of the bodyguard saw Ridwan standing by the door of the mosque and said to him, "O my lord, dost thou not want to ride my horse?" "Surely," replied Ridwan. So the young man came at a gallop towards him with his sword in his hand. He then moved his arm as though he were bending to dismount and struck him with his sword. Ridwan fell to the ground. The Sudanese rushed and put him to death. The people of Egypt parceled out his flesh among them and ate it in order to acquire bravery. So that's from Usama ibn Munkid, an Arab Syrian gentleman and warrior in the period of the Crusades. That's page 59. So again, crazy stuff. All right. So, okay, the Ridwan that Usama is describing here, this is Al-Afdal Ridwan ibn al-Walakshi, and he was a Fatimid vizier who was removed from power by a military coup in 1139. So again, very weird episode, but none of this, neither Usama's passage nor the episode at Marah, should mislead us into thinking that cannibalism was somehow accepted in the medieval world. In medieval Christendom and medieval Islam, the attitude people had about cannibalism was pretty much the same as sort of attitude we have today. So it was considered horrific and unspeakable. So, okay. So that's some stuff there for you guys. I'm going to jump over to the chat and see what everybody's saying. Okay. Oh, Quill and Ink History says, "What, you guys have already started?" No, this is not our regular live stream. Like, this is not High Deus Voltage. That's going to happen later tonight. So this is just me. I just wanted to talk about this episode, so I thought I would get in here and chat with you guys a bit. Okay. Hey, Aslan Crusader, what's going up, man? And hey, Yakov Kratzberg, how are you doing? Good to see everybody. Aslan Crusader asks about something else. What happened with the Crusade of 1197? So random, but love it. German Crusade. Yeah, that was kind of a crusade that happened in the aftermath of the Third Crusade, and they recaptured some more of the Palestinian coast. Like, they took control of Sidon and Beirut, which Richard had been looking to do before he left. So that's what that is right there. But yeah, Quilinic history. We have not started the High Deus Voltage. That's tonight. If you guys want to join us, 7 p.m. U.S. Central Time, we're gonna do High Deus Voltage, and we're going to have Dr. Andrew Latham on, and he's a really interesting scholar, and we're going to talk a little bit actually about the diversity of factions during the Crusades, like in Syria and Palestine, like the various Christian and Muslim groups, kind of how their different alliances played with each other and how, all this complexity worked itself out. So I hope you guys will check that out a little bit later. So before I go, I've got a couple more things I want to read to you guys. So first of all, just still looking at the episode at Marah, Ibn al-Qalanisi, this is our earliest source for the one of our earliest, in fact, the earliest Muslim chronicler we have who deals with the Crusades era in Syria and Palestine. And Ibn al-Qalanisi, he leaves us an account of the First Crusade. It's our earliest account of the First Crusade from a Muslim perspective. And he talks about the Siege of Marah. And I'm going to read to you guys what he says about it, because it's interesting. The Franks made an assault on the wall of Marat an-Numan from the east and north. They pushed up the tower until it rested against the wall, and as it was higher, they deprived the Muslims of the shelter of the wall. The fighting raged round this point until sunset on December 11th, when the Franks scaled the wall and the townsfolk were driven off it and took to flight. Prior to this, messengers had repeatedly come to them from the Franks with proposals for a settlement by negotiation and the surrender of the city, promising in return security for their lives and property and the establishment of a Frankish governor amongst them. But dissension among the citizens and the foreordained decree of God prevented acceptance of these terms. So they captured the city after the hour of the sunset prayer, and a great number from both sides were killed in it. The townsfolk fled to the houses of al-Marah to defend themselves in them, and the Franks, after promising them safety, dealt treacherously with them. They erected crosses over the town, exacted indemnities from the townsfolk, and did not carry out any of the terms upon which they had agreed, but plundered everything that they found and demanded of the people sums which they could not pay. So that's it. That is Ibn al-Qalanisi's account of the Siege of Marah. So he doesn't say anything about this episode of cannibalism. And of course, it happened after the actual siege. Because what happened is they besieged the town, they took control of the town, and then the main army left, and then the guys who were left behind in the garrison, winter hits, and there's a famine, and some of the very poorest among them resorted to basically eating parts of dead bodies. And it's horrific. It's absolutely one of the most disgusting episodes in probably the whole of medieval history. But we do need to keep some perspective on what actually happened here. So one more little thing I want to read to you guys from this, and then I'm going to probably head out and see you tonight for High Deus Voltage. But this is Thomas Asbridge, the First Crusade, and he gives a little summary of what happens at Marah. Here, let me jump off here for just a second. Okay, so let's read Asbridge's thing about this. Not everything went Raymond's way in the first week of January 1099. While he was occupied at Rugia, events at Marat took an unexpected and shocking turn. The lines of supply sustaining the Provençal presence there had always been tenuous, but with the advent of the new year, they collapsed. The poor, who had already endured a hungry Christmas, were now left destitute. Suddenly, it seemed that the horrors of starvation that had ravaged the Franks 1 year earlier outside Antioch had returned. Now at Marat, without princely guidance, the most destitute Crusaders went to appalling lengths to alleviate their hunger. Some, desperate to find money wherever they could, ripped up the bodies of the Muslim dead because they used to find coins hidden in their entrails. Others took even more savage steps. Here our men suffered from excessive hunger. I shudder to say that many of our men, terribly tormented by the madness of starvation, cut pieces of flesh from the buttocks of Saracens lying there dead. These pieces they cooked and ate, savagely devouring the flesh while it was insufficiently roasted. Another account is that perhaps even more Another account that is perhaps even more disturbing asserted that food shortage became so acute that the Christians ate with gusto many rotten Saracen bodies, which they had pitched into the swamps 3 weeks before. This spectacle disgusted as many Crusaders as it did strangers. So there, that's maybe I should have saved this stream for Halloween, because this is a sick stuff. But anyway, there it is. I mean, that's basically what happened with this episode at Marah. We've looked at some sources. We've looked at some present day historians commenting on it. I hope you guys found this helpful. Let's see here. I will see if anybody else has any other comments in the chat. And after that, I will probably wrap it up, and we will get back to it tonight with high Deus voltage. So, Aslan Crusaders, spooky, scary Crusaders. I mean, the thing is, when you read about this episode, it reminds you of, what's that story about the plane crash in the Andes or something? People are like starving to death, and it's just insane. It's insane. But anyway, okay, that's it for now, guys. Hope everybody's having a good day. Join us tonight. Dr. Andrew Latham will be with us. Very, very great Crusades historian. He's going to talk to us about the various factions among the Muslim and Christian groups involved in the Crusades in Syria and Palestine. Should be a really good discussion. And yeah, if you like Real Crusades history, be sure to support us on Patreon and pick up a copy of my novel of the Crusades, Why Does the Heathen Rage? I will talk to you guys later.